Welcome back. Today we are going to take a look at the Ziigaat collaboration with HBB. This one is Arcadia. So it is a 1DD, 2 BAs, and the shell looks like this. It's got a really cool kind of green, yellow flake pattern. I think the shells are kind of standard Ziigaat HBB logo. Vent, I think they got all that. They tend to just use similar shells, similar resin shells, and then change the faceplate. And this one's got some sparkly green and yellow. So that's done quite well. Matching theme on the box. These accessories are, I think, Ziigaat standard ones, the standard Ziigaat black cable. The tips, I'm not sure if they are the same. I thought these were actually different. This yellow set I thought was actually different than previous one that I had, but these are the actual tips that I used on this set. These are KZ star lines, which are actually inverted or flipped. So these tended to give me the right insertion depth, and they still had a wide bore. So you get all the bass, and it still get all the mids because it is a wide bore. So those are the tips I actually used on this set, not the stock ones. So let's quickly kind of look at the graph, and I won't spend too much time on the graph. It's actually quite a nice graph if you actually look at it closely. So we'll start with the stock version, which is in the blue. So the bass shelf actually looks quite similar to Harman shelf. If you think about it as the Harman shelf, you'll probably not get it right, but this whole graph is essentially tilted this way. So there's more bass and less treble, and you have to think about it in that way. Don't think about it in terms of a flatter V or a slightly modified Harman. That won't really work. You have to think about it as kind of a L shape. So a bass heavy, more neutral style shelf on the treble. So a lot of bass, nice kind of open mids, and then this whole treble shelf is actually dropped a little bit, so it is more neutral. So when you bring this down, you have to really extend this out because you've got a lot of bass here, and that's exactly what happens here. So I always think of it as tilted or twisted, and that's what it actually sounds like to me. So very nice graph. For those of you who are into graphs, you'll sort of recognize that that's actually a pretty cool way to do a bass head tilt, a little bit more bass, a little bit of that. And you can kind of see what happens with an impedance adapter. For those of you who have Deuce and have an impedance adapter, this is just a 10 ohm. So you will get a really big bass bump. I think that's about 5 dB. But you also do get a little bit of extra treble as well. So you're actually getting, with impedance, you're getting the right ratio of bass and treble. So those two rise together as you would really want with more impedance. And sometimes you just get a lift in the bass, and that will just give you a lot of bass, and it'll sound a little bit more muddy. This one kind of rises in balance, and I would say you get almost the same effect with volume as well. As you turn up the volume, the bass tends to rise, and you get a little rise on the treble as well. So the whole thing rises in balance and scales in that way. So very nice. Those of you graph people, you'll kind of recognize that is a really nice graph as well. Those of you who are into low pin gain, you'll kind of recognize that is kind of well below the over-energetic Harman style, so that is great as well. So we'll kind of jump into it there. So what is it? It is let me grab this. So it's a 1DD. It's got 2 BAs. Those are Knowles BAs, so they're actually nice branded balanced armatures. Why do you care about this set, or who should buy it? There really aren't that many heavy bass tuned hybrids, and there's even less that are tuned well. And now, again, I'll say this bass head tilt is really strong with Arcadia. There's more bass, there's less treble. As you turn it up, you get more bass and some treble, and it keeps the balance. Not many sets really do that. Not many sets do that without a lot of bloat and boom, and this one actually does it quite well. You may have heard the style on a 1 or 2DD set, but it's better on a hybrid with Knowles BA. You get more clarity, more separation, definitely better clarity in the mids over that much bass. And I think the two actually work together quite well. And some people just look for low ear gain, low pin gain, lower treble. That's going to be appealing to some people. Those of you who have picked up other HBB sets, you sort of know that he is kind of a fan of that style, and some people just like that style, and I have no problem with that. I think it is a great way, a great set, especially as contrast to lots of Harman sets which do 10 dB of ear gain and do over energetic treble. I think this one is really nice in that respect, and as I said, people always seek that stuff out because it's not all that popular. So is this one too bassy? I said it's got a pretty big bass shelf. Is it too bassy, too muddy, too dark? And I'll say no. I think HBB nailed the ratio, and as I said, with volume, the ratio kind of maintains itself and stays constrained and the two rise together, and I think he got all of that quite right. On the fit, I did, like I said, I went with those flip star lines because I needed a wide bore, but I wanted deeper to get all the bass. I think shallow wasn't a good fit for me on this one. On the source, a lower power, warmer, less extended source is probably not going to be a match. Those of you who have tried other HBB collaborations, you know he tends to do a little bit more bass, maybe a little bit warmer. Hybrids tend to need a little bit more power. You know, the treble is reduced, so you don't want a source that is kind of clipped on the treble as well. So all these things kind of contribute. If you have a source which isn't a good match, you know, it tends to muddy up the sound, and it's not going to sound probably the way he intended it to sound. So do pay attention to what you're plugging this one into. I tend to use desktop. I tend to use flatter sources. I tend to use really extended sources. It sounds perfectly imbalanced to me, but I can see where if you just kind of plugged it into a lower power and that dynamic driver slows down a little bit, that's not going to sound all that great. If you had a warmer source and you're adding more bass and more mid bass to this one, it's not going to sound all that great. It's kind of meant to be on more of a reference style source as opposed to something that is really warm. There's not a whole lot of brightness to it. There's no need to plug it into a bright source. So the output impedance, like I said, it does. On the graph, you saw it's about 5 dB at 10 ohms. That rises quite quickly. So do be very mindful about what you're plugging this one into. It will sound very, very bassy if your output or your source has more output impedance than kind of a lower sub 1. The volume, again, more than less for upper treble. And I would say that, again, these style of lower pinna gain style sets, they tend to need a little bit more volume. This one carries out pretty straight, and I think that is perfect. But just to get this in line with the mids and to get it in line with the treble, I do prefer this one at a lot of volume is what I will say. Those of you who are into a lot of volume will need a little bit a tick up or two on the volume. I do think it sounds better with a little bit more volume. And I would say the same thing about most sets that have pinna right about there are kind of all in the same ballpark. You do need to turn them up so that pin area kind of falls in place where you're expecting it to fall. So I think one thing that's common with HBB, and he always says he tunes his sets for his library. So do you need to listen to his library to enjoy Arcadia? And I do think that's a really fair question, and I would say no. On this particular one, I would say no. But you do need to appreciate your library with a heavier low end, but bass-led music is not necessary. So I'll say his library actually sounds pretty good. I actually liked it more with EDM, like Deadmau5 and Tableau, and I think that kind of hit it. But going into rock and hip hop and all those things that you expect to work on his library, I think do work on his library. But for me, this one actually extended pretty well beyond his library because of, again, this ratio of bass to treble, how it's a lower gain but extended. I think that works on lots and lots of genres. I even like Max Richter's classical stuff. So yeah. On this one, I think it's a fair question, but I'd absolutely say no. I think this one is actually a very general appealing. It actually works on lots of genres, but which one probably isn't going to work on? If you are a clean head, if you like this really hard dipped, no mid bass style, very, very clean mids, you like that U shape that's really kind of hardcore and clean, you know, that's probably not going to work for you. It does look U shaped, but it's tilted and it's made for people who enjoy bass when it fills in the mids or people who have similar libraries. Again, some people get really caught up in either the shape or the mid bass dip or something else. You know, they make this assumption that only good sets can, you know, have no mid bass. They have to be super clean, and that's not true. You can have a heavier bass set with sub bass and mid bass. It just has to be controlled. And it needs to fill out the mids in a way that is appealing and not distracting. And that's exactly what this set does. So if your point of view is that only sets with no mid bass are going to sound good or have quality bass, then you know, that's not quite the story. That's not the story with Arcadia. So do I like this set? Yes. I think there was a lack of hybrids that had proper sub-bass control, as I was just talking about, that had any mid-bass at all, again, as I was just talking about. And the tilt brings something different to the over-energetic hybrids that we've had a lot of in 2024. So yeah, it is something different. It's a lot different than what I thought. I thought the marketing of it, the words that are on Linsol's site didn't, I don't know, it didn't give me the feeling of what I actually heard. I think the word that stuck out in my head was reference, and this isn't really a reference. It's more along the lines of an HBB collaboration as you would expect it to be. So I thought that was kind of weird. But what does it sound like? I think it is a lot of what HBB talks about in his reviews, executed as a hybrid in an L shape. And you can almost start from left to right, all the things that he talks about. No boomy bass, mid bass control, pulls and releases, all those things that he talks about, quality bass, the speed of it, all those things are kind of right there in that bass shelf. Nice mids. He doesn't like over energetic mids. He doesn't like over energetic treble. He doesn't like over energetic cymbals. He likes a long session style treble. All these things that he talks about in his reviews are sort of right here embedded in the graph and in this tuning. And again, I think this one sounds probably more so than other collaborations. This one hits kind of left to right from 20 to 20 along the lines of a lot of things that he talks about. And those of you who shake your head along with him as he's talking about things during his reviews, you'll kind of find all those things in Arcadia. So I thought that was cool. I thought that, again, it's kind of why I like it, why this one is a little bit different. I thought this one really appeals to people who agree with the things that he says in his reviews. So the bass, I think, as I said, the first thing I noticed about this one, it has a really prominent bass presence, both sub bass and mid bass. And when people hear this kind of style of set, they immediately kind of do this knee-jerk reaction. Well, it's quantity over quality, right? You can't have a quality set that has such a high level of bass or such a high level of bass presence. And yes, that's true. If you are very much looking for a really tight, super fast, long bass textures, then the level is going to be too high. There are certain bass, once you go above a certain bass level, it's really hard to do those things and to sound that way. And if that's your expectations for what quality bass is going to sound like, then yeah, it's probably not going to be for you because it is a bassy style set. But on the other hand, compared to other hybrids that had too much bloat, too much boom, I will say that Arcadia rises properly with consistency for the chosen level. And I do think that he stuck his point of view right there in the bass. It enhances bass speed, impact, and sustain. And these are really about how HBB's point of view and how he talks about bass. So it's not super fast bass. It's the bass that he prefers and the speed that he prefers to hear it. How much impact where it is impactful but not distracting. And sustain, how it does have a presence as much as it should. When he's talking about pulls and releases, those should be heard in the way that he thinks they should be heard. So again, I think he put a lot of his point of view into this bass, and to kind of break it down into whether it's quantity over quality, I think that quality metric can, when you're talking about a set that has a higher level of bass, I tend to point at this. It either has too much bloat or too much boom, or it does sound quite natural. It's not distracting. Those are the things that I look for in a quality set that has a higher level of bass. I think HBB kind of threw in these into the marketing, and I think he is right. I think those are probably the things that he heard as he was tuning this set. So if you need more bass, like I said, impedance adapter will add more bass, but the ratio of sub bass to mid bass impact will shift a little bit lower. So this is one of those things that I kind of talked about a little while. So I think this little bump here in the mid bass gives you a nice gentle, not gentle impact, but it's impactful in the way that it can be heard, but it's not distracting, as I just said. And then you have sub bass, and kind of in the same way, there's plenty of sub bass, but it doesn't boom or bloat in a way that would become distracting. So when you actually throw an impedance adapter onto this red line, you're sort of tampering with that tuning, and you are going to introduce a little bit of bloat and boom out here. So do be aware, it's going to soften up some of the impact as well because there's so much out here. So I think it's a pretty fair trade-off. I actually listened to it with the impedance adapter, which is why I kept the graph in there, and I thought it was kind of fun. It's even more fun. I don't have any problem with people who say that they would prefer it on the impedance adapter. I think that's a fair thing to say. But, if you're into the nice ratio of sub-bass to mid-bass, I will say that kind of slides it a little bit back into softer sub bass. So the mids, again, this is an interesting recipe. Some bass for fullness, that little bit of bass that kind of bleeds in, that tilt that's going to bleed into the mids to make the mids, a little bit of bass that bleeds into the mids to make them sound fuller, a little bit thicker. Then you have the two BAs for clarity and resolution, the lower ear gain for no shout. If you like that style on warm, smooth 1DD sets, I think this one is better. It's kind of an upgrade to that style. The full mids aren't typical, but Arcadia is right there with Zen's T Pro, executing full mids without sub-bass, boom, or bloat. Again, this whole finesse that I talked about on Zen's T, I think Arcadia kind of gets it right as well. You have quite a bit of sub bass, you have some mid bass that kind of pairs right with your mids without really affecting the mids all that much. But you don't have the distraction out here that a lot of sets that try to do a very similar style, too much boom, too much bloat, especially on bassier tracks. You know, HBB's library, lots of hip hop, right? He talks about that a lot. So yes, I was expecting the control was going to be there. It's nice to hear that the control was there. But again, I think that those two sets, Arcadia and Zen's T Pro, actually pull off this warmer and smoother hybrid style, that thicker style, much better than a lot of the other sets, simply because he paid attention to the level and didn't let it go where it overstepped into too much bloat or too much boom. So, yeah. But again, that is a style of mids that is not for everyone. Some of you will love, you know, to have this, all these kind of down to the floor, to have this over energetic so it sounds super clean and super dark background. And that's kind of a different style than when you're going to get here. So similar to T Pro in sound over text, right? I think the BAs were the choice, was the right on this one, and a little dip to create some separation, but pay attention to number 3. So again, I kind of just talked about this. You know, I think the balanced armatures, you tend to get this warmer, smoother from this bass shelf. It's actually kind of a beefy bass shelf. There's a little bit of mid bass there. And then he dipped it out at 200. And it's kind of interesting. You can do that, and I talked about this with Brain Dance. You can do this if your balanced armatures aren't super dry or super bright. Doing it with Knowles actually makes a lot more sense than doing it with some of the custom Belsings or whatever else they want to call it. And you have to have this nice transition where you have a really full style over here, and over here it's not super dry or super anything that's going to sound too lean. This whole thing is also tilted. You know, again, there's just a lot of finesse to get the mids to sound like, you know, they should be, as he talks about with male vocals, and he talks about a lot of male vocals. Yeah, a lot of cool things that are paired, and I do think that having Knowles as balanced armatures. But if you're looking for super analytical, super resolution, super detailed, you are a detail chaser, you know, it's not that style. And I wouldn't say Zen's T Pro is that style either, but these two are more about creating a sound from the lower end right into your fuller style mids over, you know, really forcing detail or resolution or, you know, resolve. Those are, you can save those for other sets. That's not what these two sets did really well. They are resolving, but not in a way that is kind of forced in your face. So the treble, again, the graph is probably off. I think it sits a bit lower in level, and there's no upper treble peak that you see on my graph. It should sound L-shaped, just slightly lower in level. There's no peaks, there's no sibilance, there's no upper treble boost for over resolve. Lots of sets in 2024 did this move where they're throwing a really high peak to make it sound super resolving. There's no over energetic cymbals. Again, I think a lot of the things that HBB talks about in his reviews you find in the treble, and his preference for kind of a lower fatigue free, no peaks, no sibilance, all those things you kind of find on Arcadia as well. And also you find that he talks about his preference for long session style treble rather than fatiguing over energetic harmonics. That's exactly what you got here. And I've talked about that as well. I think there's a lot of sets that you pop into your ears, the treble level is kind of way up there, and you get a really nice wow moment of, wow, that's super resolving, super fun, super engaging. But over the course of an hour or two, that gets in your face, and it starts to kind of get to the point where your brain's like, well, you need to kind of turn the volume down or put this one down. And I think HBB tends to tune for the opposite, you know, for people who listen to sets for a really long time, and they are enjoyable and relaxing. And that just tends to be a more relaxing treble level without a lot of the things that you find on Harman sets. So I agree 100%. I think he put the right treble level on this one for that reason. So stage, for me, easily one of the better staging collabs that he's done, because it's a heavier bass set but doesn't sound inward or small or, you know, intimate, as what they say. And I can't really looking at the graph, I mean, I can see that it's treble extended in a way that kind of looks right, and there's a lot of dips there where it should be, but I was kind of expecting it to stage not as well as it actually did. I do think that I would nitpick the height. It's not super high, but it is very nicely wide and diffuse, and it has a really lovely diffuse stage to it, which you don't find all that often, especially with Harman sets. people tend to fixate on super sharp imaging. This instrument is here and is clearly delineated from everything else in the room. And this one has this more of a softer, diffuse. Things are still spatially wide, but you don't have those hard edges to it. And again, it kind of goes along with these fuller style mids and these no peaky treble. Everything just kind of fits together. It's the whole thing end to end is actually tuned really nicely, and stage just happened to fall in place, kind of not as I was expecting it to, but probably better than I was anticipating it to do. So that is what I got on Arcadia. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.